I have the pleasure to again welcome Hansjörg, who volunteered. He's the lead author, the author of the market report, and he again volunteered to give us 2 webinars, particularly for our members, but also for very interested people that found their way here. This is a very special occasion, I think, each time, because you get the insights right from the author in a quite condensed and very clear way. Thanks a lot, Hansjörg, for doing this again, as you did so often. Thanks for your contributions, and I just would like to give the word to you 5 minutes in.
Well, thanks a lot, Harald. And I start with sharing the screen, and I'd like to welcome you as well. It's really exciting to be here, and how time flies. This is the 5th edition of this report, and each year I try to improve the methodology. And so I'm happy to present the results, and I'm jumping right into the presentation, starting with a quick introduction on Biochar Europe and then setting the scene. Biochar Europe, steadily growing membership basis. Today, now 130 members. You can see the logo cloud of our members. And I'm really happy and thankful to the members, because I really think we all together managed to build an ecosystem, and I think we've built something very nice that is helpful for the industry. And that brings me to the key activities of Biochar Europe, which starts on the left with policy advocacy, and the number of members and really makes a difference when we talk to Brussels, to the European Commission. And I would say the example of the CRCF regulation, where specifically Harald had a very active role, shows that having a strong membership and a clear presence can make a difference. So clearly CRCF would not include biochar without the activity of Harald and Biochar Europe. Then the second pillar is industry standards and regulations, where we also try to give an overview and working with the standards together. Then market research, research and market intelligence. This is what you see here today, providing market intelligence not only to the members. The purpose of this report is that we share this insight with a broad group of stakeholders, to the general public. And then last but not least, communication and engagement, because we know that it is so important that we spread the word, because yet still the knowledge about biochar is relatively limited. So this brings me to the next topic, and I'd like to set the scene with a following overview over the core markets as I see them today, in the year 2026. Starting with agriculture. This is a relevant market with many different sub-applications of biochar. Here, the CO2 certificates are essential to the commercial deployment, because otherwise the biochar would be too expensive to deploy. But growth here in that sector is really limited. Then coming to the next vertical, urban green and substrates. This market is growing. It came from Scandinavia into Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and other regions. Here, the CO2 certificates are basically carrying the use case. And we see here a nice and steady growth in this application. Then moving over to the building materials, we have modest volumes today only. There are pilots. Most of the applications are just pilot projects. And the CO2 certificates is here the main driver, specifically due to or through insetting. However, this market has a very high potential once regulatory basis is set. And that brings me to the last of these four quarters, and that's metallurgy. And here we see sharply rising interest from the metallurgical industry, and the market is here driven by the ETS prices and by defossilization targets of the metallurgical companies. Huge, very large market potential. However, prices under pressure, but we do see definitely relevant volumes already today, and we anticipate high growth. So what we see here is on one hand, we see kind of growth dynamics in this direction and growth potential in this direction. This is how we see today the market. And just to remind that 3 of these applications are carbon preserving applications with the CO2 certificates, while the metallurgy application is the climate benefit here is replacing fossil fuel or fossil carbon. And I clearly want to mention here that substituting fossil carbon in the industry delivers a climate benefit that is equal or even greater than the CDR. Just as one relevant number, if one replaces coke in the metallurgic industry, that comes with a carbon footprint of 5 tons per ton of coke. And if we can replace that with biochar, the effect basically is 5 tons per ton of biochar. So I showed this already last year, and it is important to understand the numbers as they will be presented later. When we have biochar here in the center, there are mainly 3 corners where the biochar can go to. That is carbon removal or carbon preserving applications, metallurgy, as I said it, and then charcoal produced in Europe under responsible circumstances. And what is really important, and what we see, that these markets are under strong movement changes, and if the commercial conditions in one of the corners improve or get worse, the biochar just goes into another corner. And this is, I will show this later on, that we clearly see effects from 2025 to from 2024 to 2025. I'd like to highlight 2 studies or white papers that have recently been published. One on defossilizing the steel and metallurgic industry that was produced from Biochar Europe in the working group, and the other one is a white paper on the built environment and the use of biochar in the built environment. So if you don't know yet these publications, and if you're interested in these topics, I can highly recommend these. Then again, the title here is Setting the Scene. I'd like to quickly mention that the standard landscape has again widened and maybe also become a bit clearer. We have on the top 4 carbon standards, Pure Earth, Isometric, Rainbow, are private standards. And then we have the CRCF regulation that is now fully enforced. And then the United Nations Climate Change Organization has mandated Biochar Europe to develop a methodology for biochar under Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. And that work is ongoing. That was presented at the Biochar Summit by Andrei Mašek. And then we have the international standards that are there. Then I want to highlight the topic permanence, and that there is just that the growing evidence of science clearly moves all of the standards to go to 1,000 years permanence factor. And I'd like to quote Andrei Mašek from his presentation at the summit, that growing evidence shows biochar can reach the 1,000-year horizon, but only under specific conditions: high temperature, highly condensated biochar, and passing strict gates. I think that's qualification gates. And basically, this is exactly what industrial biochar in Europe is of. It's basically all of them is high temperature and highly condensated, but it has to pass the quality gates, which is then either qualified by random reflectance or by H/C. But I think this is a huge improvement that we have this 1,000-year permanence topic, hopefully finally settled. Then I'd like to quickly jump on the biomass certification, which is also becoming more important, and also for industrial applications. They might, or they will likely follow slightly different rules than CDR. So this is something that has to be kept in mind. RED 3, EUDR, these are topics that have to be on the radar screen of equipment operators. And now coming to the market report itself, and I'd like to start to thank all of those people who have helped and provided information to the report. This is the equipment manufacturers, the plant operators, but then Matthias Gustafsson and Esko Salo for Sweden, respectively Finland, which is quite a complex market. So thanks to all of you who supported, or all of those who supported. And with that introduction, I'd like to jump to the next huge thanks to A Healthier Earth, Carbon Future, and Carbuna for sponsoring this year's market report. And I'm really glad that we have the sponsors, because otherwise we would likely have to only distribute the report against payment, and this is exactly not what we want. We want to spread the word. We want to show where we as an industry stand. So thanks again to the sponsors. So the outline to the market report is very quick motivation in the read. In the full read, this will be a bit more extensive. Here it's very short. Then I present the equipment manufacturers that we see, then the numbers on the market report, and closing then with the reference projects. Then on the scope, and this is, in the very beginning it was a bit different, but now I'm looking at all of the production sites that produce biochar/biocarbon, highly condensed, installed in Europe, and commissioned either in 2025 or with a plan to be commissioned in 2026. As I said, we look at highly aromatized carbon. That means we're not looking into torrefied biomass. That is not included here. But we're looking into carbon preserving applications as well as metallurgic industry, or industry in general. And then we divided the production sites into the following categories: micro and small, 200 up to 200 up to 450 tons. And here I would say the completeness of the pyrolysis systems in Europe is medium to high. And typically these categories fully dedicate their production to carbon preserving applications. Then coming from the other side, the large, very large and industrial categories up to 2,500, up to 5,000 and beyond 5,000 tons production capacity. Here I'm trying to do an as good as possible individual split for the plants into the three categories: barbecue/energy, metallurgy industry, and carbon removal. And I would say that the coverage, the completeness of these plants is very high. And last but not least, the section in the middle between 450 and 750, and between 750 and 1.5 thousand is the category that mostly goes into carbon preserving applications. And for those where I got the individual split, I used the individual split. Otherwise, I used kind of proxy numbers. Now, coming to the equipment manufacturers, and that again shows how broad the technological basis here in Europe is. We have more than 30 technology providers, and what becomes more and more clear that the number of companies that are unquestionably TRL 9 has grown again. And this is really a unique situation specifically in the CDR sector, that there are several companies at TRL 9. And I just quickly like to skip through the companies, and without saying a lot about the specific companies, but maybe talking a bit about the diversity that we have available. So there are systems that are specifically designed to work with sewage sludge. Others are very large systems. Others do co-production of hydrogen. Others are small and specifically dedicated to farm rests or residues. So what is really great is that we have this diversity of different technologies, because feedstocks are different, business cases are different, applications of the biochar are different, local circumstances in the respective countries are different. So I think this is a very strong statement, or a very strong position of the European industry. And please, this list is not exhaustive. If you are aware of a company that is active in Europe, that has up and running equipment, please give me a call, send me an email, and not for this year's report, but for next year's report, happy to consider to take up also other players. Which brings me to the conclusion on equipment. The first, I said it already, we have high technical diversity, and that's really good because of the reasons I mentioned. The output of the systems range from a few hundreds to several thousand tons per year. There are several companies at TRL 8 and many, many more on several companies at TRL 9 and many more on TRL 8. And there's still new equipment manufacturers entering the market, also sometimes with totally new concepts, very exciting. And many of the plant operators serve more than one of the three markets. That is particularly true for the larger systems. Which brings me to the numbers. And here we go. So what you see here is the annual installed biochar production plants in Europe. So how many have been installed per year? And so this is one of the changes compared to previous reports. I'm now consistently taking out of these numbers installations which do have a clear R&D character. They are not included here. So kind of that's what last year was, just over 33 or so, end of 2024. And in last year's report, I had expected or presented that I would expect, respectively, the people I talked to expected that 52 plants will be built. And I knew already that 6 systems are expected to be decommissioned. Now, here's the question, where where we land at. And end of 2025, only 21 systems have been installed as scheduled in 2025. Now, the interesting question is, what about the difference? Well, the big part of that, with 13 systems, these have been, or projects, 13 projects have been cancelled. Then 4 projects are delayed by more than a year, and another 14 projects are realistically delayed to 2026. So again, this doesn't look that bad, because a significant part is either produced or installed or just delayed by several months. And then there were 7 systems that were not on my radar screen, and 1 change in the decommissioning, 8 instead of 6 decommissioned, makes it a total net increase of 20 plants. In total, and that's what I said, I'm also now surveying where I get aware that, or where I investigate how many plants have been decommissioned. And in total, it's 27 plants that have been decommissioned between 2010 and 2025, not including R&D installations. And for 2026, that's the projection. We're already well advanced in the year, now mid of June or end of June. The number I expect is around 30 plants to be installed and commissioned this year, and a significant part of that is either already fully installed or under construction. Which brings us end of 2025 to 205 operational biochar production plants as net number, and that is expected to grow to 235 in the year by end of this year. So I'd like to, since I talked so much about decommissioned plants and about delays and cancelings, I'd like to clearly mark that what I became aware of when investigating on this project and then on the reasons for cancellation and decommissioning, the market is really split in 2 realities. One is projects that are delivering as promised. They are built on time, on budget. The operators are running the systems at specification, and we have mostly happy operators. And then on the left side, there are also, that's part of the reality, there are systems that have either technical issues or commercial issues, and many times both. So projects get either cancelled or decommissioned after some time. And I would say this is just normal for an emerging industry. And I'd like to highlight 3 key factors that are driving in which bucket a project will likely end. And I mean, probably the most important success factor is proven technology with strong operational track record, and then experienced, motivated, and well incentivized operators. It really depends so much on the operators if a plant runs well. And the third point is, I would like to summarize it as professional feedstock sourcing, because the feedstock cost are, or can be, in many cases, be very dominant to the systems. So it's important to put a focus on this. And on the other side, on the challenge side, maybe the single most or the 2 most relevant topics are failure to monetize waste heat either fully or adequately, meaning low heat recovery prices, or not selling the full heat of the plant. Then the other thing is, that was already mentioned, immature technology is a risk for failures and underperforming projects. And last but not least, I've basically seen also many people in the last several years that were just building unrealistic business cases, which brings me to the point where of an IRR calculator or ROI calculator that was presented by Thomas Hoffmann from Decarbo Engineering. And I'd like to thank him also for providing this tool. That tool gives you a very quick overview about the economic setup, or does your project make economic sense? And Thomas provided this tool for free, and it's fun to work with it. Now, from the number of plants to the number of tons, again, on definitions, we see here the tonnage, the cumulative production capacity dedicated to biochar carbon removal. So think again of the triangle here with the three corners: metallurgy, charcoal, and carbon removal. So when I talk here about 91,000 tons, this is only the carbon preserving application. So production capacity dedicated to BCR. And what we see when we look at this number, we first here see an exponential growth up until 2023, and then here it rather looks more linear. Now, in 2026, the expected number is a growth to 105,000 tons, so still looks rather linear, and we'll see where we'll end up. And which brings me to an analysis of the growth rates. And so what we see here is that growth rates have been very high up until the year 2023, like PV-like growth rates, and is now going down to 10-15%. So a much slower growth. And the reasons for that is, in the last 2 years, or 2 years, volume moved from the carbon preserving corner to the metallurgic corner, and specifically new build production capacity is increasingly targeting industrial markets instead of the CDR segments, which has to do with the commercial setup. And the other reason is the postponements that I mentioned, projects slipping from 1 year to the other, and cancellations, and some dismantlings as well. So moving from the production capacity to the estimation of the actual biochar production. Most of you might know the assumptions for assessing, which are on a lump sum basis. It's 70% uptime assumed for a full operational year and 50% for the first operational year, and in average 6 months. And this calculation brings us then to 60,000 tons of biochar production in 2025 dedicated to BCR, and growing to 67,000 tons in 2026. And calculated over to CO2 brings us to 170,000 tons of CO2 in 2025. Growing to roughly 190,000 tons in this year, 2026. So, still, once again, biochar remains the most relevant industrial CDR technology for permanent carbon removal in Europe. And further scaling, and in this year's report, I refrained from showing growth scenarios because the growth rates are not stable enough to decently extrapolate. So I felt like at least I would pause a year to observe how this goes on. But what is very clear is scaling of BCR depends on political support. And mostly, I would say it's the ETS market that needs integration of BCR to continue growth on this BCR angle. The angle of the metallurgic industry, I would say, is mostly unaffected by the support of BCR. But what is clear is that with this solid technical foundation and the number of TRL companies, the sector is ready to speed up growth anytime when politics require to do so, and provide the volumes, the numbers on CDR. Quick snapshot on the production sizes. As you remember, we have the production capacities from micro over medium over large to industrial, and you can see that the production capacities up until large or up until medium comprise like 70%, 65% of the total production capacity. What changed from last year's report to this year's report is that this whole chart has grown on the barbecue metallurgy part. So that number has significantly grown. It's still difficult from the large producers to exactly allocate how much is going left or top to right, but the total volume production capacity is relatively easy to determine, and I would say pretty solid. Moving to the countries, where we see that that's the status end of 2025. We see that Germany, followed by Austria, Switzerland, and then the Nordics with five countries are the dominant regions. And here we see something very interesting when we look at the time scale, how this changed over time. Well, starting with Germany, still again the single largest country in terms of production capacity, but volumes are stagnating. But that's relatively easy to explain. There are three effects. One is there are plants that were decommissioned. Number two, there was volume moving from BCR dedication to industry, metallurgy, and there was some growth, but due to the decommissionings and the reallocation into other markets, the volume dedicated to BCR in Germany is basically stagnating since 2023. The region that is growing most is Austria, Switzerland. It shows the highest growth rates, around 20% average over the last 3-4 years. And the other region that is growing is Nordics, and as well mostly mentioning Sweden and Denmark, followed by Finland, and then on the rest of Europe, the dominating countries in terms of production capacity are Spain, France, and UK. Which brings me to the last section of the report, the reference projects. As you remember, we always like to highlight projects that are lighthouse projects, like this one here, a Synkraft plant installed in Austria at the famous Stangelwirt. That project uses regional residual forest wood, is producing electricity and heat, and both in self-consumption to the resort, to the hotel. Biochar production 500 tons per year. Then moving to a totally different concept, that is from Aqua Green, installed in Sweden. That was commissioned early this year. The feedstock is sewage sludge. 6,000 tons of sewage sludge are processed per year, and there's 2.9 gigawatt hours excess heat and 500 tons biochar production, whereas it's important to note that the carbon content of this biochar is far lower than when used woody biomass, obviously, and therefore the CO2 equivalent is just slightly above the tonnage of the biochar. Then, yet not in Europe, but still an exciting project from Pyrec as one of the key European equipment suppliers. The 3 systems Pyrec PX 1500 installed in 2024 and 2025. Feedstock is rice hulls, and the surplus energy is used for process heat for drying purposes of the rice. Total biochar production 2.4 thousand tons per year. Then moving to the north of Europe, Denmark, Carboforce has installed 2 CF 250 systems last year in using woody biomass, residues, agricultural waste, and municipal waste. Here the energy, the heat, the thermal energy is used for private heating network and for drying, and the production capacity is 1,050 tons per year, installed at a company called Frühdal. Coming back again to Austria, customer W4K. This is an application where an NGE system is used for feeding heat into the local district heating network. Here was actually a replacement of a 1 megawatt gas boiler. Feedstock here is thinning wood and forestry residues, 600 tons per year of biochar production. Over to Switzerland, a project from CTS with an ORC turbine from Dürr. Feedstock, woody biomass, 9 gigawatt hours of heat fed into the district heating, and 1.5 gigawatt feeding into the grid. That's beyond the self-consumption of the plant itself. 1,600 tons of biochar production capacity, and Inco is operating this plant. Over to Portugal, Ibero Massa Florestal, commissioned in 2024, the last part of the system, since 2025 certified for carbon removal. The feedstock here is invasive species for reduction of wildfire risks. It's landscape conservation. The surplus heat is used to dry the biomass, and an ORC system is under development. And this is one of the examples where a significant part of the total production is 5,000 tons of biochar per year. And out of this, 1,670 is dedicated to carbon preserving applications in biochar. And the company is currently planning to triple the capacity. And with that one, I come to the last project, again, outside of Europe, Project Carbonity from Arex. installed and or commissioned in 2025 using sawmill residues and using to dry the biomass, heat the facility, and produce oil. And the production capacity, this is one of the largest plants in the databases with 10,000 tons per year. Carbonity said they're currently planning to add another 20,000 tons of biochar production capacity in 2027. Yeah, exciting to hear in a year or two how that developed. Which brings me to my last slide, and we're then moving to the questions. So concluding, biochar has a very strong track record of rapid growth, and we have all the fundamentals to scale fast. What I find always very exciting is that I've seen projects that have been project developed in less than 6 or 9 months, and that have been installed in a year. So this makes a huge difference to many other CDR technologies and other large-scale technologies. That's the beauty of moderate size of 1,000, 2,000 tons that allows a quick scaling. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hansjörg, for this wonderful comprehensive overview of what's happening in Europe. With BCR and biochar itself, because I found it particularly interesting that we do have a really large capacity of almost 400,000 tons to go into biochar. The question is how much ends up in biochar carbon removal. That's depending, as you said, on the political will, right?
Yeah. Thanks again for your interest, and see you in this context next year.
Thanks, everybody.